Hello, my name is Paul Rustin. Since 2002, there has been a dash of child killings in the timber town of Brush Creek, Washington. Along with Brush Creek native and North Point reporter Tracy Forth, we take a look at the dark history of Brush Creek and find a more harrowing and mysterious story. From North Point Media, this is the Timberline Reports.
Sure. Shall we talk about the body of Marie Clemens?
Yes, but I want to state right off the bat that as a journalist, I have to keep an open mind to all sides. There is a lot of vitriol out there surrounding this case, and I want to be clear that my perspective is purely that, and that I'm looking to make sense of the facts and not place any needless blame on anyone involved.
You're referring to the accusations that the parents got high and therefore were negligent in their care of their daughter, and that their recollection of what happened was drug induced?
Yes, I have seen zero evidence corroborating those rumors. That is a fact. But the Clemens family has made some choices that, from the outside, seem a little suspicious.
Okay, it sounds like we have a lot to unpack. Go ahead and walk me through the case events of Marie Clemens, and then let's try to lay out the connections. Sound good?
Sure. So, for some context, the Clemens family is pretty new to Brush Creek. They moved here 2 years ago into the first housing development on the south end of town. Mrs. Clemens, Laura, opened a yoga studio up Entwistle Street last year. Marie was in fourth grade at Creekside Elementary and took dance lessons at the community center. They were moderately liberal in their views. They were known to partake quite a bit in the cannabis community. I know Hank was considering running for town council on a more progressive platform than normal for Brush Creek. That did rub some of the more traditional value folks the wrong way.
So your kind of stereotypical small town conservative worldview meets modern America culture clash?
Well, yes and no. Brush Creek is actually relatively politically progressive, but the town does still lack racial diversity, and that often isn't acknowledged. There's maybe two black families and a few Honduran families, but that's about it. What I was getting at was Hank Clemens was pushing for a more modern presentation of Brush Creek.
Such as?
He advocated for the relocation of the local cemetery on the east side of town to a new location. In his view, the cemetery was an eyesore and stood in the way of developing a new park with an adjacent housing development, which would attract new residents and tourists, as well as continue to inject more life into the Brush Creek economy. Honestly, it is a smart development and logical for the current direction of the town, but I also understand a lot of residents' opposition too. Many of the town's founders are buried there, along with a vast majority of citizens' families. One thing that surprised me was that Mayor Dickens was opposed to the proposal, despite being pretty pro-development. The local historical society just recently got it designated as a state historical site, so many people aren't comfortable with the disturbance of Brush Creek's history or dearly departed.
Is Sam Lawrence buried there?
He is, which I hadn't really thought of before.
So is this controversy around Hank Clemens wanting to move the cemetery what made him and his family targets in this case, in your opinion?
Yeah, I believe that there is some element that's taking advantage of the situation and using it to paint Hank and his wife in a suspicious or irresponsible light that would delegitimize his platform.
Can you describe the details of the Marie Clemens case?
Yes, at least the information that I have access to. So, to start, according to the reports, the Clemens family opted for an early morning hike 2 days ago, June 13th, in the Brush Creek Falls Trail System. It's a wilderness area with about 15 miles of trails that abuts the Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. Brush Creek Falls is a popular and well-trafficked in-and-out route that follows an old timber rail line, maybe 2 miles from the trailhead on the back side of town, to a nice set of waterfalls that dump water from the mountains into the main creek. So, while there are a lot of offshoot trails, the Clemens were taking the most popular route, which, by all accounts, they had hiked quite often with Marie. The neighbors stated that they saw the family leave their home around 10:30 a.m. and so they likely began their hike around 10:45.
How long does the hike take on average?
About an hour and a half at a leisurely pace. This is where things get hairy, and my details come from the police report made public. At 3:15, two hikers, Tom and Mary Pierce, found Laura Clemens wandering off the side of the trail. She looked disheveled. The Pierces thought she may have fallen down the ravine, so they quickly helped her to the main trail, but she had no injuries. They said they supplied her with a blanket from their first aid kit, and when they called 911, they said she seemed to be in shock or drugged, talking about cradles in the trees. She did say that her husband was out in the woods with her baby.
She said baby? Marie is 10, right?
Right. And it continues down a weird path. Medics and police arrived by 3:24 p.m. and began to search for Hank and Marie while Laura received a medical evaluation. I spoke to a couple of the medics yesterday, and they told me that while they can't share the contents of the evaluation specifics, they did share that Laura was displaying symptoms of some sort of mental impairment. She was transported to Valley Hospital.
So no details beyond that?
Not from the medics. Some bystanders state she was shuffling as she walked and mumbling to herself. One stated that her eyes were fully dilated, even in the light.
And what about Hank Clemens and Marie?
So the police called out search and rescue, and over the next 14 hours, it was a lot like when Sam Lawrence went missing. I was at the fire station, which was set up as headquarters for the search, as it was just down the road from the trailhead. There were about 14 people conducting the search. At 5:28 the next morning, that's when they radioed that they found Hank and Marie and that the girl was deceased. No one from the media has been allowed access to the scene, but I found my father and was able to convince him to bring me back there.
How did you convince him?
I explained to him that telling the stories of these kids and finding out what happened, it's what I felt called to do. I may have given up on teaching, but these children's lives mattered, and they deserve not to be forgotten. He was reluctant, but he agreed. We walked down the trail to get behind the falls, where they said they found Hank and Marie. The woods were veiled by the morning fog, and were silhouetted into black pillars, and there were no birds. Most times by 4 a.m., every bird is singing or calling, but it was completely still that morning, and Sam stepped right into my mind. I knew it would be the same as that day.
That must have been really affecting.
It definitely wasn't easy to step into what felt like deja vu in the worst way, especially when Sam is never far out of my thoughts. But this time I knew what to expect, or I thought I did.
And?
We arrived at the scene. It was a little hollow behind the falls. There's no trails back there, and there were about 6 large boulders obscuring where the entrance to the hollow was. There was a thick stand of hemlocks that looked so old their bark had blackened. We pushed our way through them and into the hollow. The sun had not quite risen. As we stepped farther into the hollow, my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and that's when we saw Marie. She was draped in the canopy, her body supported by the tree branches, like she was laid there to sleep. And just like Sam, she was opened up. Looking up at her, it looked like white fingers forming a nest on her torso. There was no blood pooled beneath her, and her face was that translucent grayish green. I felt my stomach twist and shrink inside me. I took a second to compose myself, and then began to look around the hollow and take in all the details. It was horseshoe-shaped, with the trees closing tightly around us. Where we entered was the open end. All the trees were the same blackened hemlocks. Their branches all dropped over the top of us, and I couldn't help thinking they mirrored Marie's limp hands. Marie herself had leggings and hiking boots, and her school sweatshirt was on. Her hair was braided into pigtails, with light green ribbons in her hair. Other than the wound in her front, everything else about her was pristine. My dad had her brought down from the trees and laid gently in the body bag that had been brought out. The medical examiner stepped forward and examined her. He looked methodically, but didn't appear to be taking any notes, which I found peculiar, but it may have been because I was present and they were being tight-lipped about any findings. But he did share that all organs were present, except for the heart. He wondered aloud what kind of animal or person could perpetrate such an act. That's when I finally noticed Hank. He was off to the side being talked to by 2 officers. He was wrapped in an insulation blanket and was shivering. All he kept saying was, "It walks, it walks, it walks." One officer came over to my dad and said they found him lying beneath the body at the foot of the tree. My dad asked if Hank had said anything, and the officer said no, just, "It walks." My dad said he didn't think Hank was capable of doing something like this, but he asked the officer to take Hank down to the station house, so the 2 officers walked him out. I followed with my dad as the medical examiners brought the body out on a stretcher. Looking at Marie's face as they zipped her into the body bag, I couldn't help but notice that she looked in that moment as if she could be Sam Lauren's twin.
Jesus. Did you talk to Hank?
Not that day, obviously. He was taken to the police station in town, and my dad said he continued to murmur to himself the whole ride there. Apparently, he was completely dissociated from what was going on, and they didn't really get much out of him until the following morning. He was a father who had just lost his daughter, and of course he was in shock and grieving. But by that point, the town was already buzzing with rumors and hearsay. Somehow word got out that Hank said he witnessed a wild, feral-looking man attack his daughter. That got people really upset and scared, and the mayor stepped in and stated there is no evidence of that, and that he had already spoken to Fish and Wildlife about doing a cull of area cougars to eliminate any threat of further potential attacks. It was also around the same time that some people began to whisper that Hank and his wife had gotten high while their daughter played in the woods. And that's when there was an accident, and the whole thing was Hank and Laura covering up their negligence. That story picked up steam when the mayor stated yesterday at a press conference that Hank's blood tested high levels of THC as well as significant levels of LSD. People are now picking sides over whether there is a wild animal or deranged man out killing kids, or if Marie was a victim of her parents' negligent choices. It's really sad seeing the town divided this way.
I'm sure.
It's like people are forgetting that this is a tragedy and are more focused on being right. I'm in the business of getting to the truth, whatever that is. And I think that this division is distracting us from listening and seeing what is actually happening. I got to sit down with Hank this morning after he was released on bail, and I think there is more to the story. Can I play his interview tape?
Absolutely.
Hello, Hank. My name is Tracy Forth, and I'm an investigative reporter for North Point Media. Can you state your full name for the record?
Yes. My name is Henry Clemens.
And you go by Hank.
Yes.
And do I have your consent to record our conversation this morning?
Yes.
Can you describe the events of July 13th in your own words?
Yes. We left our house around 10:30 or so. We had packed lunches and loaded up the car to head to the falls for a picnic. Laura, Marie, and we had done this many times before. My daughter, she really loves that hike. She likes the part where you cross over the old trestle and she can hop on the old railway sleepers and balance on the trails. She, she liked.
So this was a familiar place for your family?
Yes. We got to the trailhead, grabbed our lunches and water bottles and day packs and headed up the trail. We let Marie run up ahead, but no farther than maybe 10 yards. She called out to the birds and was asking Laura all kinds of questions about the flowers and plants. My wife is into homeopathy, so she was teaching some to Marie. We hiked for maybe an hour and a half. That's when things started to not feel right.
How so?
It started to feel cold. You know when the first frost hits in October and the air feels a little thin? It was like that. Marie was so cold, so Laura gave Marie the school sweatshirt she packed. It also got dark, but not like there was less sunlight, but the trees grew darker. Like they weren't green anymore, just kind of ashen. We hiked on for another 20 minutes, I think, and that's when I started to hear it walking.
It's okay, Hank. I'm here because I want to hear your side of what happened.
It started out pretty quiet, almost like when a deer moves through the bush. But then I noticed it was making circles around and around. The hair was up on my neck, and I knew it had to be a cougar or some wild dog or something that was stalking us. I told Laura to come over to me with Marie. I heard some movement behind me and turned to face it. When I turned back, Laura was standing there stiff as a board. Her eyes were wide and darting left to right. Marie was gone. I took off running in the direction they came from, and I could hear what had her moving through the trees. But I couldn't hear her. I called for her, but no answer. It was so fast, and the movement didn't sound anything like anything I had heard before. Like somewhere between a man running and a horse galloping. I chased deeper and deeper, and it got hard to follow as the thing headed down the side of the ravine. I was worried about leaving Laura, but I knew this thing had Marie. I passed the falls and fell a few times. I could hear it getting away from me up the other side of the ravine. I scampered up and followed around the back end of the falls, and then I heard her. I heard her whimper and the cracking sound of a soft pop. I rounded the corner, and then I saw it.
So what? What did you see?
It had her in its arms up in the trees. It was a man, but not. I don't know. I don't know. There soon I got high and shit. Fuck! God damn it! I would never do what this thing did to Marie. It had her up there, and it was all bony and stretched like a starving man, but it had fucking white eyes the size of golf balls that ain't human. And it just stared at me, holding her, and it had something in its hand that was moving softly. It tilted its head and smiled at me, and then it draped her in the branches and held out its open hand to show me it had her heart. I collapsed, I think, but from the ground I watched it walk. It walked face forward down the tree like there was nothing to it. Like a spider on the headboard of your bed, it walked down the tree. It just slinked off into the woods. It's out there still. It walks. It walks. It walks. It walks. It walks. It walks.
Holy shit. What do you make of that?
I believe Hank.
You what?
I believe Hank Clemens. I believe he did see something. I'm not sure what exactly, just like he isn't sure. What I am sure of is he isn't alone. I need to do some more research and collect some documents, but I can show you that Hank Clemens isn't the only person that has seen something in the woods of Brush Creek.
Like what, Sasquatch?
No, something else. Something darker.